How's it going, everybody? What's up? Welcome back. Dave here. So we got the buggy back. I'm sure you guys have seen on the page. The cage is done, complete. Compliments of Rogue Off-Road. Well, not compliments of. We paid for it. But yeah, they took care of us. Went ahead and we did another similar cage, very similar to Ashley's. This design is something that me and Caleb Kramer came up with a long time ago when we did my Turbo S cage, and we've just consistently stuck to that idea because it just looks so killer. And yeah, this one was done by Brian over at Rogue, and he took care of us. This thing came out super slick, but this is a 64-inch machine. We need to get this thing switched over to 72. So what that entails is we're going to be switching over the axles, the suspension components. We're going to be changing some things, moving some things, relocating some stuff. We've gone ahead and we've created some of our own parts. We've gone ahead and built our own sway bar links, our own tie rods, our upper and our lower radius rods. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pull this jack out, get this thing lifted up in the air, and I'm going to show you guys the basic, simple steps we go through to get the rear end started and get it switched over to long travel. Got the old trusty Daytona. Woohoo! It's freaking crazy how narrow this machine is. Just, I'm not used to seeing them 64 inches. Like, it's completely different animal when you go long travel. Next thing we're gonna do, pull these wheels off. All right, y'all. So all this stuff is pretty basic. The way I like to go about this is disconnect brake lines, sway bar, rear shock. We're gonna have to go ahead and disconnect everything on the rear end of this because we're pulling the whole trailing arm off, but we're also gonna be removing the hub as well, because one thing I'm gonna do differently on this one is we got some Turbo S hubs over there. They're a little bit beefier comparing the two of them, and I think they're just gonna be a little bit nicer to use simply because it'll require less drilling on this trailing arm, well, on the Turbo S trailing arm when the time comes to make the swap over. I'll show you guys what I'm talking about when we get there. All right, so we got two 18mm bolts that hold these two radius rods on. We're gonna go ahead and pull those off. Then we got a couple of 10mm bolts that hold a shield over this brake line. Got to pull that off as well. After that, got a couple of 15mm bolts back here that hold on the brake caliper. I'll show you those here in a second, and then we'll get to pulling this axle nut off. I like using an impact gun to do all this stuff. Just makes everything go a lot faster. Keep track of all your hardware. You will need to use this, putting everything back together. Out. Another thing we're going to do is we got two 15mm bolts here that hold on this sway bar link. You can go ahead and pull both those off because you're going to go ahead and put in your own sway bar link. You will not be using this hardware when you put this back together. So take these 15mm bolts and nuts and put them away for a rainy day. Lord knows I use my like junk bolt drawer all the freaking time. All right, so I'm gonna show you guys real quick. Right here, we actually have our two brake caliper bolts, and those are 15mm. Just go ahead and pull those two off, and then this whole caliper will slide right off the disc. All right, get the radius out of the way. All right, so like I said, we're gonna have to remove these two little 10mm bolts so that way you get the shield off, and we'll be able to pull the brake out of the way. There are some little nuts on the bottom of these things. They're 10mm too. So just make sure you got a little wrench handy. We'll take our brake and we'll pull this off over here. Getting a little bit closer to being able to move all this stuff out of the way. We've got the radius rods out the way. The next thing we're gonna do is pull off this hub, this rotor, get all that stuff taken care of. And we'll pull this axle out. All right, got a problem. I don't have my freaking correct socket because I left it at Rick Carter's house. So this one's a little loose on here. Hopefully we don't fuck it up. I think we're all right. We'll just pull this off. Oh boy, let me tell you, there ain't nothing sweeter than making a long travel machine with a machine that's freaking brand new. This machine only had 150 miles on it. Well, only has 150 miles on it. So what we're gonna do now is we'll disconnect this shock. We'll swing this trailing arm over here. We'll get the axle pulled out. Oh, you know what? We can probably just do this right now. Let's go ahead and try this. Now, you always hear a lot of horror stories about these freaking axles here, but you know, it's good to just get them up against the end of the cup here. Like there's a little bit of play in here. Just pull them all the way up against the edge. Pull this out so you know where the edge is. Just give it a little, just a little snap. That's it. So now, check this out. Now, see what we're going to. Pretty big difference. I'm so pumped. I can't wait to get this thing finished. All right, so here's a side-by-side comparison of the RS1 to the Turbo S. And one thing you can tell is just the difference in the size here. Kind of a tedious thing, but you need like a T25, I believe this is what it is, or T20. Whatever the Torx bit is, you're gonna have to pull these things off. I don't use these when I put it all back on. I mean, you can. I just opt to run everything underneath the shock and stuff and use zip ties. So that's all up to you guys. So we're gonna get the shock disconnected and get these pulled off. All right, so now we got that done. We'll take this last 18mm bolt out of the way, and that's the last piece that connects the trailing arm to the RS1. Here we go. Pull that out. Very good. Go. Off with the old. Back in there. Bolt in there. And now you can kind of get an idea of what we're doing. So if you guys are wondering what's going on here in the back, I actually do a little bit of a modification to my trailing arms because I don't like the way the geometry is utilizing the RS1 shocks with the Turbo S shock location. It just doesn't work right in my opinion. So I made some adjustments, came up with some solutions that fixed all the geometry in my opinion. So yeah, take it for what it is. I'm just gonna go ahead and just pretend like it's stock. You guys can make all the assumptions, do whatever you want. And yeah, let's press on. All right, so right now we're just kind of getting everything kind of just put in place. We're not, you know, finished fitting. Like the shock's just kind of in there. I don't have anything spaced correctly. We're just kind of winging it right now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get this axle put in here, and then we're going to go ahead and start mounting the hub and the disc rotor, put the brake back on, and then get everything situated and ready for the radius rods. Okay, so we've gone ahead and we put our brake disc on, got our axle nut in there. We haven't put our cotter pin back in, but I mean. All right, so now what we're gonna do is this is one of our upper radius rods. I went ahead and I removed the stock ones. We're just gonna put this bad boy in here like so. So basically, the hardware store that I have near me doesn't have any spacers that really work well for 12 millimeters. So I actually just go in there and buy me some 5/8 nuts, and I just use these as spacers. I buy a huge box of them, and then I just do that. All right, first radius rod going in, baby. Here we go. So we'll get our bolt out. Set in here a little bit. There we go, the bolt. Maybe we'll just put a couple washers and just use some washers instead. All right, so we got some washers here. Greasing is good. There we go. Put the nut on. And here's a little trick for you guys that are working on these things. So this bottom bolt, this nut back here, real pain to get to. But if you put an open-end wrench on the backside and bolt this one loose, before it comes off the bolt, okay, take your wrench out, get your finger back there, and hold your finger up against the back of the nut. Now, all you have to do is basically hold it here, take the bolt out, put your radius rod in, feed the bolt through. You're just gonna have to hold that nut back there. Let me tell you, you drop that nut underneath that transmission, it's such a pain to get out. You may have magnets and all that stuff, but sometimes those things just don't like to wiggle out of there. Okay, so right here we got ourselves some the lower rod. All right, guys, well, after trying to make all this stuff work, I had issues as soon as I went to go put on the brake caliper. So the brake caliper for the RS1 doesn't quite bolt up to the Turbo S rear hub. So we're just gonna go ahead and switch out that Turbo S rear hub, put the RS1 hub back on, and put everything back together. I'll also show you guys where we have to make our little modifications to make these holes line up for the RS1 carrier. All right, guys, so we had our little hiccup with the Turbo S thing, got all that switched out, so we got the RS1 stuff back on here. Now what we're gonna do is basically, we gotta make a little bit of a modification here to this Turbo S trailing arm. So what happens is when I use my 1¼ inch arms or radius arms, they tend to come really close to this. So what I like to do is just cut this little edge off right here. And I do the same thing down here. I actually cut this little edge off as well. Cut it right up around here because this stuff just gets really close to the radius rods and I don't want anything affecting the geometry of this thing. This is the same thing that I did on Ashley's machine, so this really is like tried and true. I know it's gonna work that way, so that's the way we're gonna do it. All right, guys, so I think we pretty much got the right side done. We've got all the alignment stuff done with the radius rods. All we gotta do now is route this brake line, put the shock on, and then once we get everything back on the ground, I'm going to work on the sway bar and everything. I'm not gonna do that right now until we're finished with all the trailing arm stuff. I've slowly worked my way over to this side. All I gotta do now is take the radius rods off, trailing arm, disconnect the shock, brake lines, pull the axle out, and then should be done before we know it. All right, everybody, a little bit of an update. I'm over here on the driver's side of the vehicle. All I gotta do is pull this trailing arm off, and we're gonna put the blue one on. So I wanna show you guys the best way to take the RS1 hubs and mount them to the Turbo S trailing arms. So you're gonna realize that all these holes don't quite match up just right. The first two do, or the front two, I should say. So if you take those two and you put them in there and you just kind of let it sit, and if you look through your holes, so that one lines up, and I'm going to tell you why. Normally it would look like so, and the reason for that is because it doesn't line up. Well, I've already made this one line up correctly, so it looks like it lines up. But when you go down to this one, see how we got an overlapping piece there? So we have to open that piece up. But there's an order to do this in. Take your front two bolts, put these in, and do the top one first. Now that I've got that one perfect, when I put the bolt in here, now I have absolutely zero movement because that bolt is holding me in place. So now it's not gonna move and wiggle around, and you're not gonna kind of have that jiggle that you would, you know, because you've elongated these holes a little bit, right? So now you can go into the bottom one and you can adjust that one with a little die grinder and just go slowly until you have it nice and perfect. That way you don't have any play out of your carriers when you mount them up. Just a little tip. All right, y'all, so it's been a couple days. Had an issue with Ashley's Tahoe. had to get it fixed, and that's really why I'm wearing different clothes. So anyways, flash forward. I'm gonna pull these jack stands out. I went ahead and I threw some tires on her, as you can see. And what we're gonna do is I just gotta put this thing on the ground. Gotta see how this thing sits. Just because, you know, that's just the way I am. Want to see what it looks like. Make sure everything's tucked out of the way. Boom, look at that. Look at that. She's a squatter. So I can tell you right now, these two shocks aren't even set up right. So this one here is definitely different than that one. Not by much, but they're close. Anyways, so for now, the rear, I think we can call that pretty much close to done. I got a couple things I got to tidy up, and then I can start transitioning into installing the sway bar, installing in the front. We'll just keep pressing on step by step until this sucker's done, man. So yeah, really appreciate you guys joining me for the journey. Hope you guys stick around. Check out the rest of the stuff that's going to be going on with this buggy. And yeah, make sure you guys check out all the other content I got on the page. Appreciate y'all's support. We'll see you guys again soon. Check you later.